Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Connolly, and I am coming to you live from the Aquarium of the Pacific here in Long Beach, California. And right now it is 10 a.m. Pacific time. If you are watching this at that time live, you can feel free to join us by texting us or emailing us. We have the number and the email on the screen here. So our phone number, if you would like to text us, is 562-286-1838. And our email is live@lbaop.org. Throughout this program, I'll be asking for observations, asking you to make hypotheses, and if you also have any questions that you want to send in, feel free to use either that phone number or that email to send those in. We always love to hear from you, and we'll answer them live during the broadcast. But if you are watching this at a later time, and you still have some questions or observations you want to share, we're always happy to hear those too. You can go ahead and use that email and send us an email, and someone will respond back to you. We just won't do it during the live broadcast. But with that said, I have my friend Jeanette and Tiff behind the camera who are controlling all of this beautiful magic behind me, as well as monitoring that text and email line. So if you have something you want answered during this program, feel free to let us know, and we're happy to chat about it. All right, so today we're going to be learning all about something called adaptations. We can go ahead and throw that word up on the screen here so we can see it. There it is, beautiful. And now adaptations are things that we have, or an animal or a plant might have on its body to help it survive, to help it live in its habitat. So let's think a little bit about ourselves, humans, to kind of give us a point of reference. So if we think about our bodies as humans, what are some things that we have on our body that help us survive? What's something on your body that you use every day to help you survive and live? What do you think? Share an idea of an adaptation you think that we have as humans. I know the first one that always comes to mind for me is our skeleton, right? We have a skeleton in our body that helps give us structure. We have a spine so we can stand up nice and tall. We have arms so that we can, talk and grab things and eat. We have legs to walk around, right? Our skeleton is a really important adaptation that we have, but not all animals have that, right? Some animals have different adaptations instead. So we've talked a little bit about adaptations, these things that animals have on their body to help them survive. And I want us today, we're going to learn about adaptations within a habitat called the kelp forest. Now, a habitat is just a place that a bunch of animals call their home. So we can see behind me, I'll step off so we can get a good look. We are looking at our blue cavern webcam. Now, our blue cavern is one of our exhibits here at the aquarium based on a real dive site off of Catalina Island. And it's a habitat called a kelp forest. So again, the habitat is a place where these animals are living, right? We can think of it kind of like their home. And there's lots of stuff that makes up the habitat, right? There are things that are alive, and there are things that are not alive. We call these biotic factors and abiotic factors. So when we're looking at this blue cavern webcam at this kelp forest habitat here, what are some things you notice that are alive? What are some biotic factors you see in this habitat? I definitely see lots of fish swimming by. You probably noticed those too, right? We have sometimes other animals living there, like some invertebrates, some animals without bones, maybe like snails or sea stars, things like that. As well as the kelp, right? The kelp is actually alive too. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So lots of things that are alive that make up our habitat, but just as important are those things that are not alive, those abiotic factors. Now, do you think you can spot anything in this kelp forest habitat that's not alive? What do you think? What do we see the kelp kind of attaching to, or it almost looks like it's growing out of it? I see some really big rocks, right? And something that's a little harder to see in this webcam, but I'm sure you can imagine, is at the very bottom of the ocean, is sand, right? We have some sand at the bottom. Some animals call that specific part of the kelp forest their home, right? They live down on the bottom of the ocean in the sand. And there's one more really important abiotic factor, one more thing that's not alive in this habitat that all that everything in this habitat needs to survive? Can you think of it? It's the water, right? That's one sometimes people usually forget about, or maybe it's the first one that you thought of. But we need the water to make this a kelp forest habitat, right? It needs to be underwater in order for it to be a habitat. All right, so we've learned a little bit about our kelp forest habitat, and now we can kind of start talking about some of those living creatures, those biotic factors in our kelp forest habitat, and learn about the adaptations they have, the things they have on their body that allow them to survive. So let's start with maybe the most important, or the one that's the most obvious, the kelp itself, right? So kelp, like I mentioned, is actually alive. Now, it's not an animal, it's actually an algae. It's kind of more like a plant. So let's think about how plants get their energy. Because that's an adaptation that something might have too, right? How does it get its energy? So based on what you know about plants, how do you think that the kelp, the algae, might get its energy? Let's take a look at this video here. What do we see kind of shining down into the water? What do you notice? Do you see that light that's shining down? Do you think that the kelp could maybe be using that to get its energy? Exactly. So just like a plant, the kelp can take the sunlight and turn that into energy for itself to live off of. What do we call it when something uses light from the sun to make their own energy? What do we call that? Starts with a P. If you said photosynthesis, you'd be correct, right? So we can see in this video all of this kelp is taking that light from the sun that's shining down on it into the water and turning it into energy to live, right? The kelp is doing photosynthesis, just like a plant is. So that's one really important adaptation our kelp has, is that it can take energy from the sun. It doesn't have to eat other animals, right? It's pretty cool. All right, so let's look a little bit more at the breakdown of the different parts of our kelp, right? So in the original webcam here, we could see that it looks like it's kind of growing off of the rocks, right? And I compared our kelp to a plant earlier. I'm going to keep using that comparison because there's actually a lot of similarities between kelp and plants that you might think of as growing on land. So when we think about a plant and how it grows, what does it have that kind of grows down into the soil? What do we call that? The roots, right? So a plant has roots that grow down into the soil to help it kind of have something to grow from, right? Our kelp is kind of similar, but there's no soil for it to grow down and have roots on, right? What do you see it doing instead? Maybe if we look over here at this one all the way on the side, we can kind of see where it starts growing. What does it look like it's doing? It can't grow roots into the rock, right? But it's kind of grabbing onto the top of the rock instead. So instead of having roots that grow down into something, our kelp has what we call a holdfast. And the holdfast is basically like a big pile, it looks like a big pile of spaghetti, but it's kind of like roots if they were on top of the rock and grabbing onto that instead. So they, instead of growing down into it, can kind of hold on to that rock. Imagine if this was the rock, you can kind of have your hand be a holdfast like this. And you can use that holdfast to grip onto a rock, right? So that you're growing upwards from there instead of having roots in the soil. All right, so once we have our holdfast on the very bottom of the kelp, then our kelp needs to kind of start growing upwards, right? So what does a plant have as it grows upwards? What do we call that kind of main part of the plant? Yeah, like the stem, right? Do you see something on the kelp that kind of looks like a stem? We're getting a really good view here of our kelp, what it looks like as it grows. Ooh, and we can even see what happens maybe when a wave moves through, or like the current moves through the water. Where do you see that the kelp is kind of growing up from? It kind of looks like it has a stem as well, right? There's all of these kind of little fluffy things coming off, but in the kind of center of the kelp growing up like that, we can see it almost has a stem. And we call this on kelp the stipe. Kind of like a stem, but it's almost a little bit bigger, and it's kind of hollow. It kind of grows like that. So it's like a stem, but we call it the stipe. So we have our hold fast, grabbing onto the rock. We have our stipe that's growing right up the middle. And then we have the part that you probably think of when you think of the kelp, right? Which is all of these little pieces coming off of it. Now, what would we call these things on a plant? What are those kind of green, maybe kind of round shaped things that grow off on a plant? Yeah, the leaves, right? And on a kelp, we have something that looks very similar to leaves, but instead we call them blades. So we can see again here all those beautiful blades moving through the water. And the blades are actually the part of the kelp that is able to do the photosynthesis. So that's the part of the kelp that can actually collect that energy from the sun and turn it into energy for the kelp to use to keep growing. If we go back to that other video in that Surge channel, we can actually see one other really cool part of the kelp that a plant doesn't usually have. Do you notice something kind of round? Do you see maybe something that kind of looks like a little bulb? Where is it on the kelp? Is it down by the holdfast? Is it on the stipe? Or is it kind of close to the blade? Yeah, I noticed it. It's almost like at the bottom of every blade. If we had a blade like that, it's right at the bottom, right there, right? Kind of that big bubble-looking thing. Oh, here's a really good picture, thank you, Jeanette, of our blade up here. And then down here we have that little bulb on it, right? We call this the pneumatocyst of the kelp. And it's actually kind of like a little air sac, a little air bubble. Now, if you've ever gone swimming and you have worn a life jacket, or maybe you've laid on a raft, something that's really buoyant, something that can float, you might know if it's something is filled with air like that, or a beach ball in the water too, right? It will float. So this is exactly like a little life jacket for our kelp, and the pneumatocyst is filled with air so that as our kelp grows, it will grow upwards in the water and towards the light, right? If it didn't have those pneumatocysts as it grew, maybe it would just kind of flop over or be pushed to the side really easily by that current. But the pneumatocys allows the blades to float up towards the surface and take in all that beautiful sunlight. So there's a lot of really cool adaptations our kelp has to make sure it can even just grow. And another fun adaptation about our kelp is that if the conditions are right with sunlight and water temperature, it can grow really fast. Sometimes it can grow up to 2 feet in a day. So it can grow super, super fast. We can get a lot of kelp just like this in our beautiful kelp forests. All right, so now that we've learned a little bit about our kelp and the cool adaptations that even just make up the kelp that makes the kelp forest, right? That provides the habitat for all these other animals. Let's think about some other adaptations of animals that live in this kelp forest, because they also have to have adaptations, things on their body to help them survive. So I want to talk about an animal that we saw when we were talking about that kelp nematocyst. I wonder if we can go back to that picture. Perfect. Now I notice there's this purple spiky thing over here. Did you think that was an animal when you first saw it? Or does it kind of just look like a weird rock? What do you think? Well, this is actually an animal. Do you know what this animal is called? Have you seen something that looks like this before? Maybe you found one kind of washed up on the beach. Might look a little different. This is an animal called a sea urchin. And this one is actually called a purple sea urchin. Can you guess why it's called a purple sea urchin? Because it's purple, right? So here is our sea urchin, and we can see it in this picture with the kelp. Now, why do you think that our urchin might be sitting on top of the kelp like that? Based on this picture of the sea urchin, what do you think it might like to eat? Can you even see its mouth in this picture? Do you think you see its mouth? Or if not, where would its mouth be? Take a second and think about that. How does this urchin eat? And where is its mouth? All right, so hopefully you've come up with a good prediction about where you think the sea urchin's mouth is. If you thought that the sea urchin's mouth was on the underside, on the bottom of it right here, you would be correct. So our sea urchin actually has a little mouth right on the bottom in the middle of its body, and it has what we call an Aristotle's lantern. It has kind of these little pieces that come together and allow it to kind of scrape at its favorite food. It's in this picture. The kelp, exactly, right? So the kelp is a really important food source on top of being, the habitat that the animals can hide in. It's also a food source. Our urchin friend here, they love to eat kelp. That little mouth on the bottom of their body to scrape at the kelp and take little pieces just like that. There we go. There's a great picture of the mouth of the urchin. Do you see it right in the middle there? That little tiny dot in the middle right there. We can see it can use that to eat, right? Now, how do you think our sea urchin can protect itself? What did we notice right off the bat about the sea urchin? What was the most obvious thing that made it almost even just look like a rock? It was covered in spikes, right? So they have those spines all over their body to help protect them, right? If you were an animal that was kind of looking for some food, you're swimming around in the ocean and you see the sea urchin sitting there and you think, this might be a good meal, right? You get a closer look and you see that it's covered in spines like that. Would you still want to eat it? I don't think I would, right? That might look like it could hurt my mouth. And even though there might be something really yummy on the inside, maybe I wouldn't want to eat it after all because it's kind of hard and the spikes might hurt my mouth, right? So it's able to defend itself, to protect itself, using those spines on the outside of its body. Now, our sea urchin is also related to an animal called our sea stars. If you watched our program earlier, you'll know that sea stars have tube feet on the bottom of their body that allow them to stick onto stuff and grab stuff. And our sea urchins have these as well. So if you see a sea urchin up close, you'll see in between all of the spines, they actually have little tube feet that kind of move around like this. And they can also use them to grab onto stuff like the kelp they might want to eat, or to help them move around and stick onto things. Kind of hard to see on this picture here, but they have a bunch of tube feet in between all these little spines as well that help them to move, to grab their food, and yeah. All right, so we have talked a little bit about our sea urchin, and now I want to talk about an animal that eats the sea urchin. So I said I wouldn't really like to eat it, right? It has those spines that protect it, that make it look like maybe not a very good snack. But some animals actually do have some adaptations to allow them to eat even a really spiky sea urchin. Can you think of an animal that you think might be able to eat a sea urchin? I'll move because I think there are some in this webcam. What do you think? What animal might be hanging out in there that can eat a sea urchin? And what adaptation might it have to allow it to eat an animal even with really pokey spines on the outside of its body? What do we think? Take a second, make a prediction. What kind of animal could eat a sea urchin? All right, if you thought a fish, you would be correct. Now, not all fish can do this, but this one that's behind me is super special. It's called a California sheephead. And our California sheephead is able to eat the sea urchins. But let's take a look at our California sheephead at first. What do you notice about our sheephead? Do you spot any adaptations right off the bat that you think could help it to survive? Well, we talked about how we're able to move around as humans with our legs, right, and our arms. What does our fishy friend have instead? Yeah, it has some fins, right, and a tail. So those are adaptations that allow it to swim around in the water. What else do you notice about the sheephead? They have I heard Tiff say they have a weird head, a fat head, right? This big bump on top of it. And this kind of has to do with their skull and their ability to eat those sea urchins. So I wonder if we can kind of take a closer look maybe at our mouth of our California sheephead. Here's a crazy picture. Look at that. Here is the teeth, and we can see kind of that bumpy head a little bit better of the sheephead. What do you notice about these teeth? Also, did you even know that fish can have teeth? Kind of weird, right? Not all fish have teeth like this, but this one does because we mentioned it likes to eat those sea urchins, right? So having these super weird kind of pokey teeth allow it to munch up that sea urchin and be able to eat it, right? So that's a super cool adaptation that these sheephead have to allow them to survive, to allow them to eat a food that not a lot of other animals are able to eat, right? All right, so here we have a picture of a sheephead, but it looks a little different. Did you notice that this sheephead, what is the difference between this one and the first one that we saw? I remember Tiff made an observation about the head of the sheephead in the first picture. Do you see that really big bump here? No, I don't see it either, right? And I also notice the color of the sheephead looks a little bit different as well. So another really, really interesting adaptation that our sheephead have is actually about them being male or female. So when sheephead are born, all of them are female. You'll have a group of sheephead, every single one of them will be female. That's what we can see in this picture behind me here. This is a female California sheephead. And then eventually there needs to be a male in the group, right? So that they can have babies, they can have more sheephead, and continue to live on. So they need a male to be part of their group. And the way that they get male is by having one of the females turn into a male. Here's our male sheephead that has that darker coloration and that big bump on its head. So when we have a group of female sheephead and they reach their adults, they're old enough that they need to have babies of their own, the biggest or the most dominant or strongest sheephead that is female will actually become a male. And then you'll have a male sheephead like this one behind me with that big bump on their head, that darker coloration, and they will be the male in the group so that they can continue to have more baby sheephead and live on, right? That they'll have continued generations of sheephead. Really interesting, right? Imagine that every single baby you had was going to be a female, right? And then one of them had to change to be a male. Very, very different and an interesting adaptation for sure. All right, so I want us to explore now another predator of the sea urchin, another animal that likes to eat the sea urchin. Take a second and make a prediction again. Do you know of another animal that likes to eat sea urchins? Now, this one's going to look very different than our sheephead. In fact, it's not a fish at all, but it does still have bones. It's a vertebrate, but it's kind of a cute animal. Do you know of any animals? There's a picture of it right behind me. What animal is this? It's a sea otter, right? So this is a southern sea otter, and they also really, really love to eat those sea urchins. And they have a ton of really cool adaptations on their body to help them survive. Let me move for a second so we can take in the sea otter in all its adorable glory. What are some things you notice about this sea otter? It's covered in lots of super cool adaptations. I want you to notice some of those adaptations. What do you see? All right, so if the first thing that you noticed was the fur, you're not alone. That's also what I noticed right away too, right? They're so fluffy and cute. And sea otters actually have the densest fur of any animal on the planet. So in an area about a square inch, about that big, they have 1,000,000 hairs in that tiny little area, right? Super, super dense fur. Now, why do you think our sea otters might need really thick fur? Why is that a good adaptation for them to have? What do you think? Do you think that the water they live in is hot or cold if they need to have really thick fur on their bodies? Yeah, right? The water is cold. They live in the cold Pacific Ocean, so they need to have that really thick fur on their body to stay nice and warm and cozy. And they also have some adaptations that allow them to eat, right? Let's think again about how we talked about the sea urchin with its spiky spines. Oh, here's an awesome video of our sea urchin eating. What do you notice about our otter? Sorry, not our urchin eating, our otter eating. What do you notice about our sea otter as it's eating? What are some adaptations that it is using? What do you see? I notice that it's using these adorable little hands or paws to grab the food. Do you see that too? So instead of an animal like an urchin or a sheephead that doesn't have hands or arms to help it grab its food and it kind of just has to swim over or walk over to it, our otter can actually grab its food and use its paws to help it eat. And they can use them to grab the food. They'll actually even use them to use tools to break open their food. So our otter likes to eat sea urchins, but also other things that have hard outsides like clams or maybe some shrimp, things that you might have to kind of crack open a hard shell or exoskeleton to get to the nice juicy meat inside. So our otter is using its hands to do that. And like I mentioned, they also like to use tools. And our otters are super, super cute and smart. And they will find like a rock or something that they love that's their favorite tool to use. And they will keep it in their special hiding place. Did you know that otters have pockets? Where do you think that an otter could have a pocket on its body? Where could it store its favorite rock that it loves to use to break open a clam? Do you think it has cheek pouches like a squirrel? And it can hide the rock in there? Probably not, right? Their face, not super big. They don't have those big cheeks like a squirrel. But I did notice in the video, as it's eating, if we look under its armpit, it kind of has a lot of extra skin there. Can we look at that video again and maybe notice how the bottom of its arms look? Ooh, are you seeing all that kind of loose skin and fur under its arms? So in its armpits, our otters actually kind of have little pockets, and they can hide their favorite rock or something, their favorite tool they want to use right in there, keep it nice and snug on them, and then use it later to open their food, right? So otters have that cool adaptation of their pocket, and they've also learned to use tools just like we do humans, right? Think about maybe you eat using a fork or chopper, a tool like that, right? Our otters can do a similar thing. It's pretty cool. All right. Now I want to talk about one other adaptation our otter has to help it eat, and that is in its mouth. Look at this adorable smile. Do you see those little teeth inside the otter's mouth? Now, from this angle, it just looks like a cute little smile, but they actually have some pretty sharp teeth. If we maybe switch over to my dock cam, I have a model of an otter skull here so that we can check out in a little bit more detail what it actually looks like. So what those cute little lips were concealing were they actually have some pretty sharp canine teeth here, right? The canine teeth are these pointy ones. And if we open the mouth and look at the bottom, we can see some sharp canine teeth on the bottom here too, right? So they can use those sharp teeth to help them eat their food. And then what do we notice about the ones inside? Do they look the same or a little different? What do you think? Are these ones sharp and pointy like the canines? Or are they maybe a little bit flatter and smaller? Yeah, right? So just like us, otters have some different kinds of teeth. So they can use those canines to kind of grab stuff and tear stuff. Maybe you were noticing in that video, they're kind of tearing away like the shell of the shrimp or the outside of something like that, right? But they also have some of these flatter molars to help them kind of like chew up their food, grind down their food, right? So our otters have these adaptations in their teeth to allow them to eat their food too, right? And I also have a treat here. I have an example of some otter fur. We can see just how thick that fur is. I wish you were able to touch it through the screen. It's super, super soft. And we can see that even when you kind of part it to try and see down to the skin, it's so thick that there's so much fur and hair in here to keep that otter nice and warm in the cold waters of the Pacific Ocean. All right, so we have about one more minute here at the end of our program, but we've learned about all these super cool adaptations. Here's an adorable baby otter. Look at those tiny little teeth that it's going to learn how to use from its mom. That super thick fur, those cute little paws, right? We've learned all about different adaptations that animals and even plants can have, like our kelp. Our kelp is an algae, but it still has some cool adaptations to allow it to survive, right? So we talked about our kelp, our sea urchin, our sheephead, and lastly our otters. And we learned that even though all these animals look very different, they still have all these different adaptations to help them survive, right? No matter the animal or the plant, there is an adaptation on it that allows it to survive, to be suitable for its habitat. All right, so that's going to be the end of our program today. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone, and we hope to see you again in another Aquarium Online Academy. Bye!